welcome everybody. And Carol, thank you for taking the time out in your day to talk to us about some of the new developments that are happening in the space of student evaluations of teaching, and how it is that this is going to happen in the future and what people can do about it right now. So without further ado, I'm going to let you get going and tell us all about it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shirra, and thank you everybody for coming today. I hope you're going to find the session useful. Please do encourage your colleagues to go onto the YouTube site once the webinar is published, because we're having quite a lot of questions about evaluations at the moment, and I think people are getting quite frustrated with the process, but often it's because there's a miscommunication around the information that's needed, or who they should contact. So just to get started, I've put a link in the chat, and if you guys can go in there, I would like to... Sorry, I'm just going into PEDEC myself. We're going to have a poll coming up. So wonderful. I see somebody has joined the classroom. Wonderful. So for those of you who don't know it, PEDEC is a really great tool, and you can use it for a very great tool for creating interaction in the class. And you can use it in live lectures or in online sessions. So as you know, we're talking about evaluations today and evaluations of student learning. I am just trying to figure out how... There we go. So I wanted to start off by asking how many of you have done an evaluation in the past year, an evaluation of your teaching in the past year. You can use the PEDEC app. I'm going to see if I can update it. Are you guys putting in? There we go. Let me just click the show responses. So 3 of you, we've got 12 people here. I know that Alex being presented, but being evaluated, sorry. Okay, so some of you have been evaluated, and if we go to the next question, why did you do the evaluation? Okay. So a couple to get feedback to improve your teaching, all of you for promotion. Okay, and 1 of you because someone told you to do it. Okay. So we see this quite often in the faculty, in that many people specifically doing evaluations for the purpose of promotion. But one of the things that's really important is that the evaluations and the feedback you get from it is not just about the promotion, or because you are required to do it kind of as a checklist item for probation or for your supervisor or whoever it might be. Really and ideally, we want to be doing evaluations to get feedback so that we can improve our teaching practice. And one of the key things coming forward or going forward is that when you are completing your probation or applying for promotion, simply having the evaluation is not actually going to be enough. You're going to need to show how you have used that evaluation in order to improve your teaching and improve the quality of education in the institution and in the course faculty. Okay, so if I just... it's hidden a slide, but there are a couple of... there's a policy on evaluations at the university, and it's very easy, or it's very important to actually read that, because it outlines really the philosophy behind evaluations in the faculty or in the university, and the purpose of evaluations. It also outlines a lot of roles and responsibilities, which are important in that it helps to clarify the process and what you can expect to receive from CLTD or QAPO or CHSE regarding evaluations. So I will put the link in the chat to the page where you can get the evaluations in order to get the policies. I really do apologize about my language today. In order to go to the page on the policies, let me just shift my screen. You will need to first go to the WITS intranet. So if you log on to the WITS website, wits.ac.za, and then you click on People, which is usually in the top right-hand corner, you will see the link to the internet. If you click on that, it will ask you to log in, and then it will show you this page. And when you scroll down, you will see policies, and if you click on that, it will then show you this page. Most of the policies relating to teaching and learning are under the University Registrar's Office. So if you click on policies, okay, and then you will have to see the Registrar's Office. And if you go under academic administration and the group type academic, you will see a number of policies there, including the policies on evaluations and teaching of courses. So both of these students' learning experience and evaluations and teaching of courses, they're very similar documents, so you can access them there. I will for today just put them in the chat, but that's where you can get to them. Now, there's a number of important principles in terms of those policies that we need to be aware of. So firstly, evaluation should be anonymous, so students are able to provide a honest opinion of students' evaluations. Secondly, when we look at it, evaluations need to be comprehensive. So when we evaluate, it's not just about asking about the technical aspects of the teaching practice, but it's also about asking about your approach to teaching and that sort of thing. So we don't just have one type of evaluation. We have many types of evaluations. I've mentioned already the student evaluation of learning experiences, and these can be through course evaluations and through lecture evaluations. You can also have peer reviews of the teaching practice, but specifically in the faculty, we also have two tools, the virtual learning environment audit and the self-evaluation of blended learning tool that you can use to evaluate your teaching practice. These two are specifically focused on the virtual learning environment, obviously, whereas the others would be more expansive. You can also do a self-evaluation of your teaching practice, or you can have feedback on your teaching practice from more informal sources. So external examiners, if you run a quick Google form in your classroom, you may receive letters from past students or various things. So anything which gives feedback on your teaching practice and you can help use to improve your teaching practice is a form of an evaluation, even if it's an informal evaluation. I've put unsolicited in brackets because in terms of the letters and feedback from students, because sometimes what we see is when people haven't been engaging with the other types of evaluation, they ask specific people for feedback, specifically for the purposes of promotion. And one of the difficulties with this is that there's a little bit of coercion there, which is not great. So ideally, you would like to have the feedback being unsolicited if you're going to use things like letters from different people around your teaching practice. So if we get into it, sorry, I'm just trying to, there we go. So I just want to deal with those later types of evaluation first. So the virtual learning environment audit, you would ask because you want to identify areas in the virtual learning environment, so the LMS that you have set up that you can improve on. And the virtual learning environment audit will specifically give you information on navigation in the virtual learning environment, communication and engagement. And it can help you to identify areas where you can improve. Okay. The self-evaluation of blended learning it will also give you some feedback or help you to reflect on how you have set up the navigation and communication and various things in your virtual learning environment on the LMS. But the key thing here is that you really want to look at the quality of the teaching practice. So how are you using the tools to create the engagement rather than is there engagement, is there not engagement, which the audit would give you information on. So these are tools which are not directly, you can see it's giving information about the type of learning environment that you're creating and how you're creating it, but it's not going to directly say, yes, you are a great teacher. Okay. So one of the important things with all the evaluations is what you do with the results. And in all cases, the evaluation is a source of data that helps you to reflect on your practice and where you can improve it and plan what steps you're going to take in order to improve. So the key thing, and this is one of the key principles in the policies as well, is that the evidence around your teaching practice is not a single source. It should not be a single source of evaluation. You should be using multiple forms of evaluation and multiple forms of data collection to guide your reflections and to guide your future planning so that you can improve the students' learning experiences. So the last one that I'm just highlighting here is a self-evaluation of your teaching practice. So when you have a critical incident in your teaching practice, perhaps you've had a really, really great session with the students, you can sit down and reflect on that practice. Why did it go so well? What had you done in the course design? How had you interacted with the students? How had you created the learning environments? And what is the learning that you take from that critical incident that you can then apply in additional spheres? Okay, so self-evaluation is also a valid form of evaluation in order to improve your practice in future. You can request the VLE audit and a self-evaluation of blended learning tool through emailing the CHSE evaluations email address. So just take note of that. If we are auditing the virtual learning environments of most courses. So we may have done your course already. And if we have done your course and you do make changes and improvements, you can ask that we audit it again. Because obviously the aim is not just that we do the audit once and never again, but that we continually audit so that we can find sites and virtual learning environments where we need to improve. We can see what the improvements have been already, and we can monitor and track how the faculty is making progress towards implementing blended learning. Okay. So that's a quick overview of some of the other types of evaluations compared to the ones that we commonly talk about. So let me move on to the peer evaluations or peer review, and then we'll talk about student evaluations as well. So there are different purposes for the evaluation between a peer review and between the student evaluation. In a peer review, you're really wanting to get feedback from a knowledgeable other, from a peer, on the pedagogical approaches that you use and your professional skill as an educator. So again, this is directed towards improving your practice or improving the course as a whole, okay, that you are teaching on, but it's also directed towards providing information for the university as a whole, which can then guide planning for faculty development, as well as resourcing around supporting lecturers in areas that they might need improvement on. Okay, so the purpose of peer review is not only to improve the quality of your teaching practice, but also to foster your professional learning and that of others, and through those professional learning opportunities to create collaborative academic communities which can assist and collectively improve teaching quality. So with the peer review, you're really kind of asking the question of, is my practice the best it can be? You're not asking necessarily whether you are achieving the learning that you set out to do. The peer evaluator or reviewer will be able to give you ideas about how you can improve your practice to increase the probability of your outcomes that you want to achieve, but they're not saying, yes, your lecture helped students to learn. That will be a very difficult conclusion for them to come to. When we look at peer review, there are 3 types of review that you can ask for. Teaching review, so this might include observation of activity, so whether it's in person or online. It could also include review of your learning management system or course materials if you don't have them on the learning management system. It'll also look at elements of course design. So as I was saying, are you using pedagogies? Have you sequenced learning? The alignment between your teaching practice, your assessments, and your learning outcomes? And are those logical, and are they likely to lead to the outcomes that you want? So there are elements of course design and the implementation of the course to see where you could be making improvements. Okay. There's also peer review for supervision, and this would focus on looking at the mentoring relationship between the staff member and the student, and also your approach to supervision. So how are you using your meetings with the students? Are there any improvements you can make there to improve the effectiveness of your supervision? How are you giving feedback to students? And therefore, what could you do to improve the feedback you're giving, hopefully to help the student learn faster around the research process? Okay. The comprehensive review includes both elements of the teaching review and the supervision review. There is a very nice document from CLTD. Again, I will put it into the chat just as when we do the questions and answers towards the end, which outlines the peer review process and the purpose of peer reviews. But please note that for all your evaluations, you need to request them timeously. And for peer reviews, you need to look at least a month before you want to do the observations or engage with the peer reviewer. Okay, so that the process has time to take place and so that you have time to get your report and you can reflect on it and even implement changes potentially before you are submitting the report to something like staffing and promotions. Okay. So if you're wanting to have the report in time for you to plan your 2026 teaching and activities and consult with CLTD or CHSE or IFA around improving the design and your pedagogies and your activities that you might be using in the virtual learning environment and the alignment between what you do in the virtual learning environment and the physical learning environment, then you can't request it during your 2026 teaching. You've got to request it the year before, sort of thing. Okay, so the peer review process, you request a peer review by emailing CLTD on the connect.cltd email address. You will select your reviewer or your interviewer for coursework. Sorry, I don't know why it stopped sharing. Can you guys see the screen still?
Yes.
Oh, okay, cool. Thanks. So they use the term reviewer for undergraduate and coursework requests. They use the word interviewer for the postgraduate supervision reviews. Okay. And so you'll request the reviewer or interviewer. They'll tell you about their availability, and then you'll start the process. So in this preliminary meeting and goal setting, you are going to need to provide information, and you are going to need to, engage with the reviewer around goal setting for the review process. So I've put in bullet points there: teaching philosophy, your approach to the course design, what are the objectives for the course, who are your students, what sort of teaching practice and assessment practices are you using, what are your challenges and the needs that you have, and what are you aiming to get out of this review. Okay, so you will need to sit down and reflect on those questions before you meet with your reviewer. Your reviewer and you will then decide on a plan of action around observations and what they want to review in order to give you the appropriate feedback, and then they will give you feedback and a report. And following that, you are then required to submit an action plan so that you can be planning how this process will influence and improve your teaching practice going forward. Are there any questions around the peer review process or anything else that I've said so far? Shirra, yeah?
Carol, hi. I just want to know if CLTD has formalized the route of, I guess I'm looking for a word, reporting. When somebody does a peer review and then they discuss it with the person who is being reviewed, what happens to it after that point?
So they are working firstly on kind of automating the process so that you can request the review without having to email them, is one of the first things. The other thing is that they will have a repository of the review reports, and then we're going to be, well, not we, they are going to be looking at how we then feed that back into systemic challenges. They're not certain at the moment, I will say, around how they're doing that. Kwapo has better ideas than CLT, but yeah, that's the situation at the moment. So at the moment, the reports will primarily go to the individual, but they are exploring how obviously anonymized reports can then be shared so that we can look at more systemic issues that may need to be addressed and planning of things like faculty development and that sort of thing. Does that answer you?
Okay, thanks for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just that the discussion previously, and I'm sure you'll get to what happens with the student feedback on teachers, is that it used to be a personal thing between the lecturer and CLT. Yeah. And now the feedback gets sent to heads of schools, etc. And the concern was with these peer reviews, whether they would get fed back into heads of schools or even more directly into heads of departments, which I think is a concern for most staff.
So the policy on evaluations does state that, I can't remember what the wording is, but there are statements about the evaluations are ideally developmental. And so the reports are not shared without, the direct singular report is not shared without the consent of the lecturer. But there's also the recognition that, this is a massive data source around potential systemic issues, as I was saying in the university. And so we need to be tapping that data somehow. So it's not that your report would be anonymized but it still says what course. It can't say if for example, my report is going to Shirra, it won't take out my name, but then still say that it's referring to, the PGD course on curriculum and still have that course code on it. It would be that there's a process for analyzing across reports for a school or a department or even at the faculty level, and then generating a report similar to how you would look at interviews and transcripts, and you would code them or whatever it might be in order to find more systemic issues that we need to address, and we can then look at improving. Okay, so that's the review process for the peer review. As I said, I will put the document into the back. Clement, yes, sorry.
Yeah. Thank you. I just have one or two concerns to raise. The first is for those of us concentrating mostly our work is being concentrated on postgraduate students. That is, we are doing supervision. So how often can we request for peer review over student evaluations? And then secondly, since we are at the level of a postgraduate at the master, so the issue is we have around 50 or more students in the department. We do not come in contact with them for a whole year, all of them. So there is also a possibility of maybe the students' evaluation forms being sent to some of the students with whom we have not interacted for a year. So in that case, what are some of the mechanisms put in place to make sure that they only send the evaluation forms or questionnaires to the students we have interacted with, who may have give a genuine or a good idea about our supervision work?
Okay, so thanks, Clement. So I'm coming to the student evaluation still. Okay, so we'll get to that in a minute. So far, I've mostly focused on the peer review process and then the other forms of evaluation that we've had. In terms of the timing, though, and so the timing of evaluations, how frequently you're requesting them, depends very much on what the teaching practice is that you do. Okay, so the policy says that every course, not every lecturer, every course should be evaluated every time it runs. Okay, that does not mean that every lecturer on the course is evaluated every time it runs. In addition, when we're talking about student evaluations, there is course level feedback that is given to the lecturer, and that will be collated. So if you are teaching on a particular course, you do not necessarily need to request your own personal evaluation as a lecturer on that course every single year. You can use the general course feedback as well as a reflection point of what's happening in the course as a whole to think through kind of in a self-evaluation format of how does that relate to what your teaching is or isn't. So when you're looking at whether you're going for a peer review process or the evaluations of student learning experience, you need to sit and think through about what is the what are you really wanting to learn from the evaluation so that you can improve your practice. Okay. If you are wanting to know more about your supervision that year, then you may request the supervision review for peer review from CLTD. If you're wanting to know more about the student learning experience and any changes that you've made, and is it translating into improving the student experience, then you may go for the student experience. Okay. I'll come to the requirements for probation and promotion at the end of the talk. But as I said at the start of the talk, even when you are going for probation or promotion, the point of the evaluations is to improve your teaching practice. Okay. And show the quality of your practice. So if you are requesting an evaluation and you are not reflecting on it and changing your practice, it's really the reflection and the change in practice that's there for, staffing and promotions is going to be looking for. They're not just looking, oh, great, you have an evaluation, tick. Okay, so yeah, okay. Okay, so in terms of peer review, let me move on. So student evaluations, as I was saying, there are two kind of types of evaluations. There are course evaluations and there are lecture evaluations. Okay, these are actually run concurrently. So for every lecturer evaluation, there will be some questions which are automatically included in that evaluation. And then in the lecture evaluation, you then get to select additional questions. Okay. And what the university is doing is then looking at the responses from the students and aggregating in particular those compulsory questions, if I call them that, across lecturers teaching on the same course to create a report for heads of schools, heads of departments, or course coordinators around the course as a whole. Okay. You can request a separate course evaluation. It is QAPO still in the process of improving QAPO is still improving that process, I should say, and setting up that process. But you will ultimately be able to select just a course evaluation without having an attached lecture evaluation to it. Okay. But even with the student evaluations, there are many, many questions that you can ask and you can put in your own questions. So you really need to think about what is it that you want to know from the student evaluations, because you will then select the different statements depending on what you want to know. So for example, if you want to know whether your plan for learning was implemented as you intended it to be, you may be asking the questions like lectures and tutorials were well integrated, so that you know that you got that blend and alignment between the different learning activities correct. If you're wanting to know whether students actually learned, then you're going to be looking at things around the lecturers or, the activities made a contribution to my understanding. If it's you want to know that you created the learning environment that you were intending, then you're looking at the questions around, how you are facilitating the learning in the class. Are you welcoming viewpoints? Are you making students feel that they are able to speak up in class and that you are welcoming their contributions? And if you want to know if you are effective in what you are doing, then you're going to be asking questions like whether you are clear and understandable. Okay, so you really do need to think before you set up your evaluation around what you are wanting to know about your teaching practice. And really, when we contrast the peer evaluation versus the student evaluation, the peer evaluation is telling us around, is your practice, are you planning your practice and implementing it in a way that would be aligned with quality pedagogy, so teaching methods, assessment methods in education? Here, when we look at student evaluations, we're really asking about the student experience of learning. A student can't tell you whether a tutorial is the best way for you to teach the content, but they can tell you whether they learned from the tutorial. And those are two different types of questions. Okay, so like I was saying, you need to think about what you're looking for. So when we look at the type of student evaluation specifically, QAPO will run supervisor evaluations. So whichever students you have registered for you and you are supervising in the year, they will request you to send the student numbers and the course codes, or they'll capture it through the university systems around which students are allocated to you, so that you are getting the evaluation from your students. Okay. There are then two other types of evaluations, which are the course evaluations. Okay. And these have also, these different types of evaluations have slightly different questions which are allocated with them. In our faculty, we have kind of different types of courses. The first type of course is one which is very predictable. Okay. It runs according to the 4 teaching block structure. That's calendar for the evaluations linked with that is currently linked to the Braamfontein teaching calendar, which doesn't follow our teaching calendar. We are discussing with QAPO that we will have a medical school 4 teaching block calendar, which we can incorporate from 2026. It might take a bit longer for us to get going though. Okay. But this first type of course follows a structured 4 teaching block kind of approach. When you look at your teaching in this course, you teach this topic kind of once in the course for whenever that course runs, okay? And when you are teaching that topic, you teach the whole class at the same time. So it may be that you have a lecture in the 3rd week of the teaching block, and then you have your tutorials in the 4th week of the teaching block, and you have different tutorial groups, but you are giving the tutorial to every single one of your tutorial groups, if that makes sense. It's not like you're giving a tutorial to one group and somebody else gives a tutorial to the other group. Okay. So you teach the whole class. You might not be teaching the whole class at exactly the same time, but you will teach the whole class about the topic, either in lectures, tutorials, or practicals, and you are teaching that topic kind of once for the year. Okay. When we look at the rotation-based evaluations, which we usually call bedside or clinical teaching evaluations, this is not a predictable course. Okay. You have rotations in the course, so you would be teaching the topic more than the same topic, the same tutorial more than once in the year, you know? And the typical example for this is in medicine in the 3rd and 4th year, where we have some students doing the surgery rotation, and then those students move on to pediatrics, and then the next group of students comes into surgery, and they get the same tutorials at the bedside, but they you don't have the whole class at one point in the year when you're teaching it. It kind of comes on a rotation. So you're teaching a proportion of the class at any single time in the academic year. And so there are not two different formats, but because we have to accommodate with the rotations that you're not teaching the whole class at once, and you've got this kind of repetition of the teaching throughout the year, we need to have a separate structure for running those rotations. For both or all of these rotations, you need to make sure that you request the evaluations. Sorry, for all of these evaluations, you need to make sure that you request the evaluations timeously. So you cannot request an evaluation after the start of the teaching block. If the rotation has started, you cannot, come and say, well, I want to evaluate the students, or I want the students to evaluate me. The students did the rotation in March, and now it's September, and I'm asking for the evaluation. So you need to look at your year and plan out the evaluations in advance. Okay. So if you know that you want feedback similar to the peer evaluation, that you are going to want to receive feedback in June, you need to be starting to look at asking for that evaluation at the start of May, when that rotation, or mid-May, whenever that rotation starts, okay? And if your teaching is in the start of block 3 at July for a standard evaluation, then you need to ask at the start of block 3 for when that call comes out for the standard evaluations. Is everybody clear on when you would ask for a rotation-based evaluation and when you would ask for a standard evaluation? Are there any questions about that? Because we frequently have people complaining that they can't ask for their evaluation at the start of block 3 because they don't know the students who are coming to the rotation until it's going to be, September. And that's why we have this thing that you can ask, as you get that student group, you can provide that information for the rotations. I've also have staff members who've said, I can't do the 4 teaching block structure because of the rotations. We've also had staff members ask for rotation-based evaluations when they actually, it's a very predictable course that follows the 4 teaching blocks structure. Are there any questions about that? I'm not seeing any hands, so let me move on. Okay. So when you're wanting a student evaluation, you will email QAPO, and you need to give them obviously your name and your staff number, but you also need to give them the course code and name of the course that your students are in, irrespective of what type of evaluation you want. Okay. So I've put a QR code there. If you're looking for the course codes and names, you can find them in the rules and syllabus book. You can also find, particularly in the postgrad space, there are often people you will have students from different cohorts in the same classroom. So you might have honors and master's students in the same classroom, and you need to make sure that you give both of those course codes. Otherwise, you will not hit both groups. Okay. Or if it's registrar training, you often have a junior registrar and a senior registrar, which will be divided, whether they're in their first year, their second year, their third year, or their fourth year. And so you need to check what those course codes are. Otherwise, we cannot find the students. Okay, as much as we would like to help you, we simply cannot find them. Okay. So you need to give the course code or codes and names. Okay. And as I said, if it's a postgrad, please make sure, sorry, I do not know what I typed there, but please make sure that you check the codes, and it should be a mixed group. Please make sure that you check the codes so that you are giving the correct course codes. If you're also, for the clinicians amongst us, if you're not sure around the course code or which group of students it is, very often speaking to the departmental secretary will help you to figure out whether you have which year of study students are in and things like that. Okay. For the standard and supervisor evaluations, all you need to provide is what's in this initial gold box, and then they will load the evaluation for you, and you will get a link to the evaluations platform. Please note that this is only sent to your WITS email, so you either need to have a forwarding functioning on your own WITS email, and I do recommend that you bookmark your link. Okay. There's no need to register for the evaluations platform. When you get the link, if you click on users, there are a couple of, when you log in and you kind of click the drop down to indicate who you are, there are a couple of options there, but most of them say don't click or don't use. Okay, so you just click on the users function, and that will take you into your evaluation specifically. If you are asking for the rotation-based evaluation, you need to give more information, okay, because the way in which these are loaded onto the system is different. And so we need to create a specific rotation ID just for your evaluation. And it means that we need to put in more information. So you also need to give the date of the rotation, which hospital or healthcare facility you are at, and which clinical unit you are in at that healthcare facility. So for example, if I'm in orthopedic surgery at Barra and the students are going to start on Monday, the 22nd of September and go for 2 weeks, then I will say my date of rotation is 22nd of September to the 6th of October. And I am at Chris Hani Baragwanath, and I am in trauma surgery. Okay. You also need to get the student numbers for the specific group of students that it is. Okay. When we have rotations, many of those rotations and the allocation of the students is handled at departmental level. So for example, if I use clinical medicine as an example again, the university through UMI will tell clinical surgery that these 40 students need to come into surgery, but it is a surgery department or the clinical department itself which allocates the students to the facilities and the clinical units, and to the specific staff members. That information is not fed back to the university. So you need to tell us exactly which students you have been interacting with or will be interacting with. You can either get that information again from your departmental secretary, or if it's day one of the rotation, you can ask the students for their student numbers as you get it, and then feed it through to QAPA. Please note particularly for the rotation-based evaluations or evaluations of clinical teaching, we frequently get given staff numbers for postgraduate students. Okay, we cannot run the evaluations with those staff numbers. We have to have their student numbers. So you will need to make sure that that is what you're getting from your staff member. Okay. Just a note on your frequency of your evaluations, especially for rotation-based evaluations. We have quite a lot of staff members who ask us to set up an evaluation on every single group coming through for every single rotation across the year. Please do not do that, because the students get survey fatigue having to fill in the rotations, that many rotations, okay? And what it means is that it actually means that your colleagues do not have as much opportunity to request evaluations, okay? So choose a particular rotation in the year or a particular time in the year which suits you to do the evaluation, and you will select for that group of students. If you want feedback from every single groups, you can do the others through Google Forms or just by having a chat with them in class to give you more informal feedback. But for a formal university feedback on the rotations, please don't request every single rotation. Okay. Is everybody happy with that so far? Any questions so far? Okay. What I'll just say is when we find staff requesting for every single rotation, it's not because they actually want to learn and see if the rotations are going well, if the students are learning and if the learning experience is good. Quite often we're finding it's because they want 6 or 7 evaluations quickly for staffing and promotions. Okay, so the student evaluations process, I would prefer to do this live. So let's just check if I can get, there we go, my thing back. Okay, and unfortunately it logged me out. So let's go back to doing it not live. So sorry that it's so small, but it's really around showing you when to click. So when you click on that link that you get for the evaluations, okay, you will click users and then it will come in, and there are 2 places or a couple of places that you need to set up. So the first one on this update your question selection, you will click here, and that will take you to a screen where you have all the questions that you can ask. As I said, sorry, you can't quite see it, but if you look here on the screen, it will say include, okay? And so these are the compulsory questions. The first section is the compulsory questions that you get. You will then see a tab for Likert scale questions. And if you click on show all or expand all, it will then go down or show you all the different questions that you can ask. And as I said, you will look at each question and you will say, do I want to include this or not? Okay. You can only include 5 or 6 of these Likert scale questions. So you do need to be selective about what you include. If you want to make your own questions, you can do that as well. Okay. So you will select additional questions you want to put in for your Likert scale questions and then for open response questions. Sorry, let me just see if this is changing. No. So as I said, you can put in your own questions and then you'll click the customize button and then put it in. And you also select what comment questions you want to do. Please make sure that you click update after you have done the questions. Otherwise, it will not save it. Okay, and then your review will not go out. And we have had that as a problem as well. The other thing you need to do is make sure that you set your start date and your end date, and you click update once you have finished the whole process. Please note that you will not get the evaluation report on the day when your evaluation ends. Okay. We need to run the reports on the system at set dates. So we have set those dates according to staffing and promotions so that people can get these in time for staffing and promotions. as a secondary thing. And we will communicate when those reports will be run so that you can plan in advance when you need to get the report that you need. Okay. But it's not like as soon as the evaluation is finished, you get the report. There is a delay in receiving the report. The report is sent to you as soon as it is generated. And it's important to note that when you get the report, I'm sorry, I couldn't screenshot one because obviously I would show you who the lecturer is, which doesn't quite work. When you get the report, you will get the ratings on your Likert scales, along with information about how you compare to others. And then you will get the open response questions. You'll get the statements that the students have typed in there. And like I said, the key thing is then your reflection on that report. Okay, so it's really about bringing it all together, and you do this in your teaching portfolio. So the teaching portfolio, again, is not something that you just create for staffing and promotions. It should be an ongoing document that you add to around your teaching practice. So those self-reflections and self-evaluations around critical incidents, you can include those in your teaching portfolio. You can include the informal forms of evaluation, the results on blended learning audits and your self-evaluation of blended learning. You can include all of those as well as your student evaluations and your staff evaluations. And it's about documenting your successes, your areas for improvement, and then as you reflect on the feedback, how you can plan to continue your successes and improve your challenges. Okay. And then once you've implemented changes, you evaluate again and what has happened. Okay. So key is growing, that the aim of the evaluations is for you to grow as an educator and improve the quality of your teaching practice. So when you're reflecting on the results, you do need to think through what professional development opportunities do you need to make use of, or who do you need to consult with so that you can improve the quality of teaching and learning and improve your skills and up your skills. Okay. And how can you take part in communities of practice to improve the quality of your practice? So just to note, there was the question earlier around how many evaluations you require for staffing and promotions. As I said, all of the forms of evaluation, all of the types of evaluation should be in your teaching portfolio, and you should be reflecting on them and then planning to improve your practice on them. In terms of the requirements specifically for staffing and promotions, you cannot have purely informal or self-reflective formats of teaching, evaluating the student learning experience. You do need to have peer evaluations or student evaluations. You do not have to have both in every calendar year. You should have one of either of those in a calendar year. Okay, so you can supplement the student evaluations with more informal evaluations or the other formats within any academic year so that you're getting, good and useful feedback on what your teaching practice is. So that is me finishing at 1:00 exactly. Sorry, everybody, that I spoke a bit long, but I hope that you found it useful. I'm not sure if there are any other questions. I'm happy to chat about them or answer any questions that there are, but I also recognize people may need to drop off for their next activity. Shirra, over to you. That's what I've got.
Carol, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to spell it out step by step. And I do hope that if people didn't get it all 100% the first time or communicate with their colleagues, that this is a place that people will come back and check what the process is. Thank you for giving up your time today, and wish everybody a good afternoon. Next week is public holiday, so we'll be getting together again in October. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Enjoy the afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Shirra. Sorry, I forgot to put the things in the chat, and I'm doing that now. So you should be able to get them from there in the next few seconds.
The recording is still happening, so that's okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Cool. So anything else I need to say?
No, I think we're good. Thank you very, very much.